So thank you all again for coming out. So I was going to talk to you a little bit about how it is that I got to be in this position running for governor, since I'm more the person that I usually am as a doctor working in Southern Oregon in an intensive care unit. And I hadn't particularly planned to be up here talking to you all about why I'm running for governor. And it was only about last June that I actually sort of came up with this, where I felt compelled, I suppose you might say, to run for office. So I moved to Oregon, or moved to Southern Oregon about 5 years ago, and my daughter was born not long after that, and I read a book called Earth, the first 4.5 billion years, not very long after that, and it had a very bleak projection about how our climate it had a very grim sort of sketch of what the potential for the implications on Earth for changes of our climate might be. For example, that at times when the average global temperature has changed by 5 to 10 degrees, everything larger than a mouse got exterminated on the face of the planet. So, I read through this book, and maybe that's a little bit more apocalyptic than it is likely to play out. But I thought, that's a huge risk, even if that isn't exactly how everything plays out, like worst possible case scenario. Nonetheless, even the potential for that is enough of a threat that I really need to change what I'm doing personally to try and address that. So, I did sort of things which I think a lot of people have done. And I bought an electric motorcycle, I bought an electric car, I put solar panels in my house, and I thought, well, that's not bad, it's a decent start. And then I thought, I need to, that's a reasonable place to start, but I need to do a lot more than that. So I started volunteering with activist organizations in Southern Oregon, and I put in a lot of time, and then I also put in quite a bit of money. And after a while, and these were all charity organizations, and after a while, I began to get somewhat frustrated with these organizations because it seemed to me that that all of their organizing and all of their activity was ultimately intended for political action of one sort or another. And so mostly what we would spend our time doing is we would sit around, we would organize a meeting or a rally or a demonstration or something along those lines in front of legislators somewhere. And so, or we would try and dream up ways of getting to be in the governor's office to be able to ask the governor to do something for us. And so after a while, it sort of dawned on me that really what we were actually trying to do was politics. And the 501c3 category, or the 501c3 organizations, as charity organizations, the one thing that they are prevented from doing is engaging directly in politics. They cannot do anything partisan. So it seemed to me that this whole 501c3 category, the charity organizations, was essentially a way of putting all of the activists in a shoebox and threw them out of sight. And the other thing that I sort of, that occurred to me is I listened to a talk by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he had a very long sort of a conversation with the audience, but one of the things that he said is, these corporations that put money into campaigns, they're for-profit organizations, and they put money into campaigns knowing that they're actually going to make a profit out of that. And so, and if you look at published literature in Huffington Post and places like that, the return that they get on their investment, if you want to call it an investment, is somewhere between 6 and 21 times. So for a relatively modest amount of money, for like Goldman Sachs or for whoever, they get a really substantial return. Like those are excellent returns on your investment, no matter where you're investing. But when Robert F. Kennedy was talking about all this stuff, it sort of dawned on me that I had been putting money into these various climate change organizations or environmental activist organizations, and I wasn't sure that I was getting anything for my money. More recently, I noticed that wolves have been delisted from the endangered species list, so I kind of feel like my money has gone nowhere. But as far as the return on investment for putting money into charity organizations, I think that the return on the investment is very low. So on the one hand, I thought, these organizations mostly want to do political work, and they're prevented from doing that, which is already strange. But in addition to that, whatever money I've been putting into these organizations probably is better put directly into the political process. And so it occurred to me that really, because I happen to be in a fortunate position of having more time and more resources to work with than a lot of people, I was like, with the time that I have and with the money that I have to work with at the moment, really what I should do is I should run for some office. And I thought, and my main motivating factor to get into this political process at all was climate change and what I was worried about for the future of my family. But if you're going to run for office, and if you're going to propose to really do something meaningful about climate change, you have to run for some sort of an office where people will think, this might be your plan and everything, but you really need to be in a position where you can actually do something about that. So, you could start at the entry-level positions of the Democratic Party, and you could run for chief dog catcher, which is what my father suggested. Or you could actually make a real statement, and you could do something that, to some extent, satisfy the requirements of a stunt, if you like, and just start at the complete top. Among other things, it gets you into the front of the voter's pamphlet. So even if you're a relatively short attention span person like I sometimes am, if you read through your voter's pamphlet, I'm right there, right up in the front. So for multiple reasons, it seemed like, because it would be a position that would actually give you the authority to really make meaningful changes and to set the direction of the state, and also because it had an element of, audacity to it. I thought that was the proper place to try and direct my efforts. So that is how it is that I came to be running for governor instead of chief dog catcher or some other entry-level political position. The other things that the other things that I guess are important to me about politics at the moment, besides for climate change, are the political structure, or the economic structure that we have in Oregon. And I think that one thing that is a problem for the entire United States that Bernie Sanders puts a lot of emphasis on is the economic inequality in our country. And the economic inequality, in turn, I think, comes from the trickle-down economic policies or the economic rationalist policies that have basically run our government's economic agenda for the last 40 years. And these are almost identical political or economic policies that led us into the Great Depression, and that FDR basically rewrote from the ground up when he took over from Howard Hoover, if I remember correctly. And so, I don't think that we're maybe in quite such dire straits as things were when FDR took over the government, but nonetheless, we sort of have been sent down exactly the same path. And I think there's a couple of things that are really important to know about this economic policy. One of them is that it involves deregulating industry, which I think has led to the financial meltdown of 2008, which was the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, which sequentially led to the subprime mortgage lending and the economic disasters resulting from that. But also the lack of regulation of pollution of various different industries, both like glass, for example, or Exxon polluting our atmosphere and our environment. So I think that that's part of this economic nationalist policy. Business should not be regulated. If it interferes with business at all, it should not be. It has no place in our economy. But the third thing is the concept that businesses should have unlimited ability to contribute to campaigns, which I think has enormously corrupted our political system in many ways. But as Seth was pointing out earlier, one thing that sort of gives me hope about Oregon politics and American politics in general is that I don't know that it necessarily takes all that money. We don't really have very many. There's no, from the perspective of a scientist, it's hard to know whether you would actually be able to run a campaign and make a meaningful difference without having a lot of money. Because all you really have is two political parties that have a lot of money. So there's no example of what happens if you run for office without a whole lot of money. And as Seth was pointing out, if you have if you're trying to deliver a message which really people don't like, it takes a lot of money to make them believe you and to finally vote that way when it comes to the election. So perhaps it takes a huge amount of money to make people do what they don't want to do. But if you happen to have a message that people really liked and really appealed to people and made sense to people, perhaps it wouldn't take all that much money. And perhaps, especially with social media, you might actually be able to get the message out to a lot of people simply by having them forward your information, your website, your contact information out to all of their friends. And this campaign, besides for having the motto of the audacity of audacity, besides for that, it's also, it's meant to be an experiment, like a scientific experiment. What happens if you don't have millions and millions of dollars to run for office, but you make your best effort to aim for some, executive position? I don't really know. This is, like I say, an experiment to find out. But I think that many people in Oregon, as is evidenced by Bernie Sanders' support, many people in Oregon are really fed up with the Democratic Party, and they don't think the Democratic Party represents them very well. And I think that that's why a lot of people have endorsed Bernie Sanders and have volunteered for his campaign, and I think that's why Oregon is going to vote overwhelmingly for Bernie Sanders. And I think the best evidence that the Democratic Party is out of touch with that is the fact that Kate Ryan endorsed Hillary Clinton, because I think that most people in Oregon were very surprised by that, because I think that they would have assumed that she would have supported their political priorities. But I don't know that the Democratic Party is particularly concerned about the political priorities of Oregonians. I think they're mostly concerned about the political priorities of the Democratic Party. So anyhow, for many reasons, this is meant to be sort of an effort to circumvent the existing political structure. And I don't know how it's going to work out. I feel compelled to do this, to take on this project. And the goal is to be elected and to change the economic structure of Oregon and to really make a huge dent in climate change. Because I think that we actually could build a model of clean energy economy in Oregon, and that could be translated around the world. So I think that it's possible to make a huge difference just with work that we might do in Oregon. So it is meant to be those things, but it is an experiment as well to see what happens when you put yourself out there and try your best. So anyway, thank you all for coming today, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any questions. And so.
Hi, Kevin Fitz. I'm a healthcare advocate, particularly focusing on folks on Medicaid and Medicare. According to the Oregon Health Authority, in January, there were 1.1 million Oregonians on Medicaid since the expansion of Obamacare AC. 1.1 million Oregonians. So that, in crude math, that's just a little bit more than 1 out of 4 of us. Yep. Now that's more in Albany and the Lens district than in the Pearl district or West Lynn or et cetera, et cetera. But as a physician, John Kitzarber was a physician and got me started in an emergency room. As a physician, do you, why don't you illustrate that issue more? Because I know an awful lot of people on Medicaid don't vote, disenfranchised, transitional housing and stuff. But why don't you emphasize some of your target at that 25% of Oregonians who are actually receiving the Oregon health plan?
Well, I think, I guess there's a list of different things that I think Oregon needs to have somebody work on, and one of them is, there's a list of things that are important political issues that need to be addressed, and I think that to some extent, the only place that they're going to be able to be realistically addressed is kind of in the highest levels of government. So I guess one way that I would say that I would advocate for that 1.1 million people is by supporting Bernie Sanders, because I do think that his political priorities include making sure that people that really have marginal access to health care have access to good quality health care. And I don't know that so I support his priorities in the concept of universal health care and single-payer health care, because I honestly think that for a variety of reasons that's in everybody's best interests. I mean, one thing that has been a problem for a long period of time is that if you have private health care, then there's no particular incentive for the government to prevent dangerous toxic chemicals or substances, let's say, from being sold in the marketplace. For example, tobacco. If the government had to pay, if we taxpayers had to pay for all of the consequences of the use of cigarettes, there's a huge financial incentive to make people quit smoking, as it is with a private healthcare system, private insurance, physicians who work on their own practices. There's no financial incentive to reduce smoking particularly. Speaking as a pulmonologist, I can tell you that if anything, from a business perspective, I should be telling people to get out there and start smoking. And that makes perfect sense from a free market business, perspective. But that, of course, is ridiculous. But as far as that, so I think that trying to fix some of those problems is more than you can do from a relatively low-level political position. I think maybe the governor of the state could have a significant impact on that, and I think tried to do good things as far as providing healthcare access to everybody. And the Oregon Health Plan was a good effort, although I think that it's not as well funded as it needs to be. But really, ideally, it seems to me that Sanders would be elected president, and then we would be able to roll out a universal healthcare system and a single-payer healthcare system that would provide quality healthcare for everybody, low income, no income, as well as everybody else in our society. But as far as like targeting that group of people as a voting bloc, I haven't made any particular effort to. I don't know. I haven't sort of, I guess I'm here not so much as a doctor as I am as a dad and a voter. So that's that's how I feel like I got here, not so much because I want to do something differently with the healthcare system. I think it's got problems that should be fixed, but my first priority is fixing climate change because I really feel like that makes all other problems seem puny. I mean, people's individual problems are very important and often are more important to them than larger societal problems, but if you're in a senior administrative position in government, I think it's actually your responsibility to take care of those larger societal problems and also work on trying to make sure that everybody's individual problems are dealt with. But from that position, the things that we should be addressing are the largest issues. Any other questions anybody has?
With climate change being such a large focus for your campaign, how do you see Oregon moving forward to mitigate some of the climate change circumstances that we find ourselves in?
So one of the things that is a sort of a simple step that we could take is there's a bill that's being dubbed the Healthy Climate Act, which in 2015 was House Bill 3470, and in 2016 was Senate Bill 1574. But this is a cap and trade bill which has already been sort of vetted through the Oregon legislature, which it's a bit unclear to me whether it's actually going to move forward or not. In 2016, there was this big toss-up between the Coal to Clean Bill and the Healthy Climate Act, which was a cap and trade bill. And there was, to some extent, maybe a lot of political negotiations that went on behind the scenes, but in the end, the Coal to Clean Bill was the bill that had the support of the 501c3 organizations and also the fossil fuel industry. And I think that bill is kind of a lousy bill, basically. I think that it describes a sequence of steps that were likely to be happening anyway. Also, I think that the time frame that it's talking about is way too far out into the future. So I think that was the lesser or the weaker of the two bills. So the first thing that I would do is advocate for the Healthy Climate Act. I think that we can really, to set up a clean energy economy in Oregon, we need a source of clean electrical power, and we need a battery. We have a huge battery, which is, in my opinion, the Bonneville Dam, or is something that the Bonneville Dam could be used as. And one thing that's also, I think, an interesting possibility is that solar panels pay for themselves in around about 3 years' time. So the initial investment in the solar panel is all paid back at around about 3 years, and from that point onwards, since the solar panels themselves are so low maintenance, the electricity that they generate is very inexpensive. If you could use that electricity and put it back into the solar panel manufacturing facility, you would steadily reduce the cost of the solar panels that you're manufacturing. And I think that it's sort of analogous to a chain reaction to some extent. But I think that with that system, if Oregon as a state invested in solar panel manufacturing and also in solar panels, you could wind up with a state-owned utility, a solar utility, as well as a system that creates jobs for people in Oregon by manufacturing solar panels, as well as staffing this clean energy facility. But that clean energy itself would also, I think, attract a lot of businesses that are really interested in clean energy. For example, a lot of .com businesses, technology businesses that are all interested in having a clean power supply. And I mean, another thing about the Coal to Clean Bill is that at the moment, at least, there's no way of separating the renewable energy electricity from the rest of the electrical generation mix. So, it all comes through the same wires, and there's no way of selecting out the coal-fired electricity that will still be going on in Wyoming and just consuming renewable electricity in Oregon. So that's another thing. I think also it is possible to use electric cars in Portland along the same sort of model as the car-to-go system, where it's sort of like a group-owned or publicly owned, in my sort of envisioning a publicly owned electric vehicle that has multiple different users signed up for the service. And I think that with that you could replace a lot of the vehicles in the major metropolitan areas in Oregon, and that would go a long way to reducing our transportation carbon footprint.
Yeah, about biomass.
I think of all the different renewable energy sources, biomass has the most jobs in it, is what I understand. It actually creates the most employment. And I think that Oregon could do things differently with its timber industry, but I think it is also possible to use biomass to generate electricity. I don't know that it's ever going to be a large part of our electricity footprint, but I think that it's certainly something that can be used. I think that Oregon, I think, will be a timber state going on into the future. I think it needs to do its timber industry differently, but some of it at least can be used to put to create biomass electrical generation plants, and I think that will work well for some communities, for example, out in eastern Oregon and places like that. Sure.
Yeah. My name is Julian. I don't know if you've given this much thought, but my question concerns state preemption laws. Oregon has many preemption laws from minimum wage to rent control to seeds and agriculture. Makes these issues impossible for local communities to make their own decisions concerning these and other matters, leaving all control to the state. How do you feel about, and what is your position on state preemption laws?
Well, the one that comes to mind is the preemption laws regarding housing. I think that there are state preemptions that prevent local communities from finding their own solutions to the housing crisis that's going on in Portland at the moment. And I think that the state government seems to have this policy of sort of waving its hands and saying, well, the local communities should fix it. But in the meantime, they also have these preemptions that prevent the local communities from doing anything like it. And I don't, if the state is actually going to get in there and fix it, well, then perhaps that's great. But in the meantime, they're not. And so, until something happens differently, those preemptions, I think, are really interfering with Portland and Eugene and other cities from making progress with their homeless crisis, with the homeless crisis that we face, and also with the rental crisis and other things that we face. So I think, as far as I can make out, those preemptions are causing more trouble than they're worth and should be made to go away. I don't have as much insight into how they work in other circumstances, but I do think that local communities, who else has better information than the people that are in the midst of the problem and are trying to deal with it? So I think that it's, in most circumstances, really, if you have a problem, then you need to go to whoever it is that's part of that problem and talk with them and ask them what is going on and try and figure out how to solve it. And the people that are best equipped to do that are the people that are in the local communities, it seems to me. I don't know if that answers all of your question.
Yeah, I think it does pretty much. Thank you.
Any other questions from anybody? Yeah. Go ahead.
So, what's the primary role? Most of the burdens sympathizing the academies will have been eliminated, including burning.
Possibly. Possibly not.
So to get on the general ballot, you have to run as a third party candidate.
Yeah. So in Oregon, well, so the way that the Constitution is written in Oregon is if you run as a Democrat in the primary, you can't switch your party to then run as some other party candidate going into the general election. So if I make it through the primary election, then I'll run as the Democratic candidate for governor. But yeah, it is most likely that I won't make it through the primary election, and Kay Brown will be elected in the primary election. And very likely she will go on to become the governor. And actually, you probably pay a lot of attention to politics, but it's interesting to me that the primary election is where we actually elect the governor. So that's a much smaller pool of voters than all of Oregon. But in any case, so yeah, the candidates aren't able to go forward to, if you get thrown out at the point of the primary, then no, you can't go along and run as a different party candidate in the general election. In 2 years. Yeah, it is. That's all true. Yeah, you could run as an independent. That's certainly true. And
why can you run as an independent? Why can you choose the Democratic Party to run under the Democratic Party? Oh, sorry.
So 2 years from now, or 2.5 years from now, I would either run as an independent or as some other candidate. But it's also, I mean, one thing that, one of the things that sort of got me into this process in the first place was the voter's guide. Because the voter's guide, if you registering as a candidate costs $100. Getting your pitch, whatever your pitch is, into the voter's guide is $3,000. And that goes to every single Democratic voter in the entire state. And before I started running for governor, the thing that I was doing was, with this group Hair on Fire that I was a part of, we purchased advertising in mainstream media, like the Wild League or the Argo, wherever. And so I saw the voters pamphlet and I was like, well, that's exactly the same thing. It's just a different newspaper. It happens to be an annual newspaper, but or actually it's a every 4 years newspaper, but nonetheless it's a piece of advertising. So you can get whatever message you like out there in that voter's guide, and you can write whatever you like. So, it seemed a great opportunity to force people to at least think about climate change one more time in a different form.
That argument sort of applies to the general election too. Instead of getting a voter's pamphlet in front of every Democratic voter.
You get it in front of every voter.
Everybody.
Yeah, well, that's true. So
the current voter guide goes to everybody with all the Democrats and Republicans. It goes to everybody, right? Yes. For the primary.
Well, I'm talking about general.
Yeah, the general too. But I just want to clarify the sore loser law, it's called. If you're a candidate in a political party, major party primary, and you don't succeed, then you can't run as another party's candidate for the same office in the subsequent general election. So you could, in theory, run for another office, also a statewide office.
So
I would consider that possibility.
logically, if you want to get your message out, you want to aim for the general election, and you don't want to run as a general Republican because you know you can cost out the primary.
Yeah, I mean, at the time I thought that it would get to the it would be a better way of getting to the audience that I was hoping to get. But I mean, you're right. Getting to the entire state would definitely get you more people. And I had at one point I had thought that the Democratic Party would be a better audience for this message, but I don't know that that's true anymore. In fact, I'm not at all, I am beginning to think that it's not at all a very good audience for this message. I don't think that they care particularly. But do you have another question?
Yeah, I was at house parties with local politicians all this winter season, and one question I asked them, and I haven't seen a whole lot of press, but do you have any, do you do public criticism or opposition research on Kate Brown and talk about some of your criticisms of her in any sort of deeper way?
No, I mean, I suppose I haven't. We've mostly focused on the message that we want to get out rather than trying to attack Kate Brown particularly. And I mean, I don't know, we're not, we're only just learning how to do this. So I wouldn't say that we're a very experienced campaign. We know the value of an attack ad compared with the value of just trying to get your own message out, and which one might work better under what circumstances. But yeah, I mean, I think that Kate Brown, I think there are things that, I have, the criticisms that I have of Kate Brown are, to start with, that her chief of staff is Kristen Leonard, who was the vice president of the Lobbyists Association of Salem. And I can't think of a better way for industry to run politicians than for them to be the chief of staff of the politician. So it seems to me that, that may not be explicit corruption, but it is, it's got to be awfully close to that.
I just wanted to add one thing about the Kristen Leonard. I did some research on it. She was also the chief lobbyist, or one of the chief lobbyists for the Pembina project. She worked for the Port of Portland. She is on record at City Hall having lobbied for the Pembina project to the City of Portland. So Kate Brown's chief of staff was also one of the primary proponents of a propane terminal right here within the city limits of Portland. So it's another little thing.
The woman who runs the healthcare for the state of Oregon is a lifelong conservative, free market libertarian Republican. Runs the whole Oregon Health Authority, $10 billion a year industry.
Yeah, I think a lot of things could be done better. My focus again has been largely on climate change, but I think that as Bernie Sanders has been doing a very good job of pointing out, the sort of trickle-down economics, which has sort of taken our tax money and through tax breaks on corporations and wealthy individuals, has given it back to those corporations and wealthy individuals. That was originally intended to be a way for those people to make jobs for the rest of us. But basically what that has amounted to for 40 years has been a colossal legalized tax dodge. And the jobs that was supposed to lead to have not materialized. You know, the jobs that have been created in the United States have been low income, low wage jobs. Many jobs have been created overseas for workers who done in the United States. But also all the money that was made through that, you know, tax evasion, legalized tax evasion, or however you want to describe it, that money was put back into the political process. And, you know, you might talk about perhaps $250,000 contributed to a governor's campaign through tax breaks turning into millions of dollars. But if you imagine millions of dollars and millions of dollars put into our political system, what's the return on that? I mean, that's got to be an awful lot of money that's being generated. But that process is the process by which Kristen Leonard became the chief of staff for Kate Brown. I mean, that's what she's doing now. She is an investment in the industries of Oregon. And I mean, I guess the concept of the United States, we the people, is that we are a democracy. The country is run by the voters. But through trickle-down economic policy and the sort of subversion of the democratic process by corporations of the United States, our government, our elected officials, Kate Brown, is run by corporate America. And so, you know, I think that she represents the political wing, the legislative wing, if you want, of corporate America. I mean, maybe that's a bit of a polemical way of saying it, but I think that it's largely true. I mean, I'm sure Kate Brown makes her own decisions to some extent, but there's no question that they are heavily influenced by her advisors, starting with Kristen Leonard. Any other questions? Thank you guys all very much for coming. I appreciate it.